Welcome guys to Attraction Realm. How you guys doing today? There's something important I would like us to, check out today when it comes to the inner meanings, right? Inner meanings. We're going to look at how your thoughts becomes things. How your thoughts become things. How your thoughts becomes things. How your thoughts becomes things. And then we'll take a reference from Genesis, right? 1 and then all the way. Now there's something I would want us to look at before we delve into Genesis chapter 1, and that's the fact that the Bible appeals more to our minds. The Bible appeals more. That is, the Bible is more of, okay, let's say the Bible is scientific, right? The Bible is scientific, but it is more of a mental science. More of a mental science book than any other thing, okay? It is more of a mental science book because it appeals to our reasoning. It appeals to our reasoning. So you have to be very mindful of that fact. And of course, most of the time, people tend to interpret some of these things literally. But what we're going to do here, or what we intend doing here, is to interpret the scriptures esoterically. All right, we're going to interpret the scripture esoterically. That means inner meanings. All right, so we're going to look at how your thoughts becomes things from the book of Genesis chapter 1. Now, in the book of Genesis chapter 1, the scriptures read that in the beginning. Now, take note of in the beginning. All right? Take note of in the beginning. Most of the time, people tend to interpret the scripture so literally, more like English word. But it is very important that we look at how the scriptures was actually translated into English first and foremost. So the scriptures was translated into English from Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. And as a matter of fact, the writers of the Bible were scholars, intelligent and smart scholars. And what they wanted to do was look at the Bible holistically and then translate the Bible into English. And of course, they did that. And that is when we came up with the King James Version. All right, that's when we came up with King James Version of the Bible. So it is very, very important for us to look at it from the perspective of the Bible itself, or the scriptures written first and foremost in Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, and then the translation into English by King James into his own version. So, and we're going to be looking at that because in the beginning, in the Latin word is, in the beginning in Latin word means in principle or in principal. In the beginning in Latin word, before it was translated into English, means in principle. So when you look at the translation of the Bible from this point, then you will know that the writers of the Bible didn't want to talk about the creation of the world as a whole. They wanted to talk about how the world was created or how things are created. And then they came up and said, in the beginning. But if you look at the Latin word for in the beginning, it means in principle. So that means in the beginning has been said or has been written in English does not mean in the beginning as well, but in principle. But in principle. So that means that they wanted to talk about a principle that envelopes creation, a principle that brings about something more like in order, of causation. All right, so they wanted to talk about a principle or a universal law, that brings about things. So in order of causation, that was how that in the beginning came about. Okay, so first and foremost, know that in the beginning means in principle. That means in the order of causation, the thing that brought about creation. God. Now let's look at God. Now we have seen in the beginning. Now let's look at God. So he said in the beginning, God created. So let's closely look at God. In the Bible, so many places where the Bible referred to God as spirit. And note that spirit and not a spirit. All right? So many places where God interpreted the Bible, where the Bible interpreted God to be spirit. All right, so let's look at what spirit really means in the Latin word. In Latin. All right. In Latin, the term spirit in Latin is spiritus. It means spiritus. It has several meanings. One, breath or breathing, referring to the act of inhalation and exhalation. Then two, soul or spirit, indicating the immaterial essence of a person or life force. All right, and that's the one we are looking at here, soul. Or spirit, meaning immaterial essence of a person or life force. So here we can now see clearly that in the beginning, life force or the soul essence, so let's say the soul essence. In the beginning, God, spirit, in Latin, spiritus, the soul or spirit, soul essence or spirit. God created. So now you're seeing in the beginning, meaning in principle. That's the Latin word in principle, in the order of causation, meaning that the universal laws in the beginning, in order of causation, God, meaning spirit, in Latin, spiritus, soul essence or spirit. All right? Good. So let's look at the other one, because I want you to have an idea of how your thoughts becomes things. Okay? How your thoughts becomes things. Now we have seen in the beginning and we have seen God. Now let's also look at created the heavens and the earth. The heavens, the heaven and the earth. Now if we look at the heavens and the earth clearly, as it is written in the Bible, heaven must be the spiritual or innermost being, or the unseen, or involutionary. Okay, so now you have the heaven, meaning spiritual or innermost being or unseen. Why did I say that? There's so many places in the Bible where the heaven is referred to as the stuff within. Even Jesus said it, that the heaven is within you, that the kingdom of heaven is within. So for the kingdom of heaven to be within, it must be a spiritual stuff or an innermost being or an unseen part or the involutionary element, of creation, right? The involutionary element of creation. Now that we have seen heaven, and we have seen it being as a spiritual or the innermost being or unseen or involutionary element, now let's look at earth. All right, now if heaven is the innermost being or spiritual, then earth, the opposite, extreme opposite in polarity, right, must be the outermost or physical, right, or evolutionary, okay, element of creation. But bear in mind that heaven and earth are the same thing, only that the heaven is the earlier version. I've said it before in one of my teachings, is the earlier version, while the earth is the later. So in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, once you look at that critically, you tend to want to consider some fact here, and that's the fact that the writers of the Bible did not see God. As a matter of fact, they don't know who God is, but they were inspired. Let me clean this up. They were inspired. And when they say someone is inspired, most of the time people think that they saw God and God started to download things to them literally. No, it's not that way. They were inspired. And when we say inspired, what do we mean? When we say inspired, that means that they had something within them that brought about them to start to think about how the world was created or how things became. And then they started to look at the things in nature. They looked at the ocean. They looked at the sun. They looked at the moon. They looked at the trees, and on and on. They just looked at things in nature. And then from things in nature, they saw a particular thing in nature that looked more exactly like something that brings about creation. That thing has the power in itself to bring about creation, and that thing is man. So they were inspired by the nature. They were inspired by the ocean, sun, moon, trees, and all that. But a particular one got them thinking so hard that this particular thing in nature brings about creation in itself, and that is man. So for them to know who God is, they decided to dissect man and how he brings about things in creation. So you saw in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but they now went further and then talked, because of course the heaven we cannot see, is unseen, but the earth is the same. But how did the earth come about? And then they went further and said, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but the earth was without form But the earth without form and void. Did you see that? The earth without form and void. So they looked at more like how it is that would bring about creation without form and void. More like your imagination. Have you thought about it? Imagination. More like you're sitting down and then in your very quiet, still state, you started to imagine something that you want to create. And that thing you want to create is still without form and void. How? Look at that metaphor there, metaphoric. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. So darkness was given a face. All right, darkness was given a face. So the earth without form and void, more like you're imagining things, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. You see that darkness was given a face. So you are in a place imagining it has to be in darkness. It has to be metaphorically. I forgot to say that. Metaphorically. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. All right. So metaphorically, you're sitting down and you're trying to create something. First and foremost, what you're trying to create is still in its chaotic state, is still unseen. It still doesn't have a form, is without form and void. Darkness upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God, that's the next one. And the Spirit of God hovered. It said, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now that we have known that this darkness must be about what you're imagining without form and void, first, darkness in the face of, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, trying to, more like you're trying to bring out something. You're imagining something, but it's still in its dark form. It's still in its state of unknown. Let's put it that way. It's still in an unknown state. And then the Spirit of God moved over. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Upon the face of the waters. Now look at the Spirit here again, coming up, meaning life. Now let me put something clear here, that the writers of the Bible needed to do what we call analysis. Even though that the whole of this thing are in synthesis. The whole of this thing that I'm explaining are in synthesis. More like you cannot separate them. But for the purpose of analysis, we have to separate them. So when you see the Spirit of God, it is in analysis. These two things are the same, but we're trying to separate them in order for us to have an idea of how we bring about things. Don't forget how your thoughts become things. So here the Spirit of God is the life of God, which I've said in that other part to mean, first I said God will mean the life, or it can also mean energy or divine thought or universal intelligence. Universal intelligence. Hope I'm spelling it correctly. Let me clean this one up. Universal intelligence or universal mind. So the life of God, the life of energy, divine thought, universal, Wallace Dibato calls it the formless substance, or the formless substance. And then God had called it human imagination. And the Spirit of God moved. So look at it properly, said, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So now we have seen what spirit is, we have seen what God is. So the life of imagination, the life of your divine thought or intelligence moved upon the face. You see, the water is given face here again. Water given face. Now let's look at what water is esoterically. Water esoterically means formless substance. Esoterically in the Bible, most of the time when you see water, it means formless substance. So, but this formless substance would not pick form unless the life of God moved upon it. So it has no form unless the life of God moved upon it. And then once the life of God moved upon it, that is what gives it its form. Gives it its form. So more like you are and darkness was upon the face of the deep. You're trying to imagine something, but it's still in darkness. You're not, it's unknown. And then how? And the Spirit of God moved. The Spirit, the life of your intelligence, the life of your imagination. And the only way that your life of intelligence or life of imagination can bring about that thing that is formless within you is by moving upon it, breathing upon it. So more like you're sitting, and then the intelligence, your thoughts start to brood. Your thoughts start to brood upon the water, the formless substance. Because of course, esoterically it means formless substance, but for it to pick a form, the Spirit of God has to move upon it. Right? The Spirit of God has to move upon it. Now, once the Spirit of God moves upon it, what happens next? Let's look at what happens next. So your thoughts being in the deepest form, in the dark form, without form, all right, more like in the darkest, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, without form, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water, more like the life of God, or the life of your imagination, the life of your thoughts, moved upon that substance that has not yet picked form. It's in its formless state. That's the esoteric meaning of water, still in its formless state. And then, and God said, now let's look at that clearly. And God said, now we already know who God is. Now, words are usually used to denote thoughts. They are usually used to connote or denote, or whatever it is that is the English there, to connote. Words are usually used to more like interpret your thoughts. In the Bible, they are used to interpret thoughts. So anywhere that you see word, it must be vibration, energy vibrating. Of course, have you ever thought about how your words come? First from your thoughts, and then it goes straight into your heart or the soul, and then you start to brood upon what it is that you want to say, pending the fact that if you're conscious of what you're saying or you are not. But that's how it, more like an impulse. It goes straight from your thought, and then you talk. So it's more like energy in vibration. And God said, so your thoughts that's still in its formless state, but it has to pick form. And how does it pick form? By the Spirit of God moving over it, brooding on top of it. And then out of the blue, and then out of the blue, God said energy in vibration used to connote words, energy vibrating at a particular rate of speed. All right, at a particular rate of speed. And then voila, the Bible said, let there be light. Let there be light. So you can see the extreme ends of heaven and earth, darkness and light. Did you see that? The earlier version of something, the earlier version heaven, and the later version earth, the earlier version darkness, and the later version light. Now darkness, like I told you, is the formless state of your thought, but it's about to pick a form, but it's still in its dark face, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. More like you're trying to imagine something, you want to create something, but it's still in its formless state, and the only way for it to pick form is and the Spirit of God moving, brooding upon it in your thought, the Spirit of God brooding on your thought or your imagination. And then out of the blue, God said meaning word, which is used to represent thoughts. All right, thoughts, energy vibrating when you think, and then you say it out of the blues. Energy vibrating at a rate of speed brings about let there be light. Now this light here, the extreme of your darkness in polarity, right, means illumination. Let there be illumination or understanding. Let there be understanding, or let there be knowledge. Did you see that? So that is how your thoughts become things. First and foremost, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Your thoughts, or God, like I said, life or energy, created the heavens. In principle, don't forget, I told you what it means in principle. In the beginning, in the Latin translation, means in principle, in the order of causation, how things are created. How things are created. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And then he went further and talked about the earth without form and void. How? Darkness upon the face of the deep. Your thoughts trying to pick a form, but it doesn't have a form. It's still in its dark state, more like vibrating at an extreme, right? But at the darkest part. And God said, after every other thing, at the later part, and God said, because of course, once it's in its dark state, having not to have picked a form, it will at some point pick a form. But the only way that it will pick a form is, and God moved upon the face of the waters. Esoterically, water means formless substance that has not picked a form. So a formless substance that has not picked a form, and the only way it can pick a form is when life broods upon it, and darkness was upon the face of it, and God and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. And God said, energy vibrating at the rate of speed, let there be light, let there be illumination, let there be understanding, let there be knowledge about the things that you're thinking. So this is how your thoughts become things in principle. And of course, that is how Genesis talked about in the order of causation, how the world was created. So they looked at man. They were inspired by a whole lot of things, but something inspired them more vividly, and that is man. How is it that man brings about creation? If we are able to understand how man brings about creation, then we can deduce how it is that God brought about creation. Did you see that? So they dissected man and then looked at how man brings about creation. And then they started to talk about it in principle, in the order of causation. And then at the later part said, and God said that his word, energy vibrating at the rate of speed, let there be light. So light at that point, esoterically or metaphorically, means illumination, understanding, knowledge. And now once you saw that, you now later saw in other verses where the creation started. Okay, the waters and all other things were created. But in Genesis 1:1, is trying to tell us that in principle, this is how our thoughts becomes things. First and foremost, it is in the mind, in the beginning. In principle, it is in the mind, divine thoughts, and then our divine thoughts in heaven and on earth, in the unseen, and then in sin. Since that we don't know the heaven, but we know the earth, the heavens, the spiritual part, the earth must be the physical part. That's the extreme, opposite extreme. Okay, and then from there you now saw, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So you saw in principle, and then that principle is what brought about let there be light, let there be illumination, let there be understanding or knowledge about that which you are thinking about. All right, so that is how your thoughts becomes things, esoterically, in the scriptures. You understand that now? All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, bye for now. Love ya.